Hello, hello, hello folks. Welcome back. I'm Eli, and as you can see, we're not in the garden today because I'm going to take you through my plan and my spreadsheet for succession planting for next season. So I said I was going to take you through my plan for succession planting. So let me just catch you guys up in case you haven't followed me on this journey. But basically, succession planting is, in its simplest terms, planting little and often. Let me give you an example. Every year I make a big plan about what I want to grow this year in the garden and I get all excited. Yup, I spent last night going through and organising all my seeds. I've done my seed viability test. I know what seeds will work, which ones don't. So I can get going. Sound familiar? And then I end up with certain months of the year where I just get so much food from the garden. This is a daily haul of strawberries. We are sick of strawberries. Tomatoes, peppers, carrots, beetroots, salads, just so much of everything. And then I don't like waste, so if I can, I will try and find ways to use up this glut of this harvest. Often it ends up with me sharing things with the neighbours, and often the neighbours get sick of it and then stop opening the door when I go there. Yeah, we've all been there. A lot of people do deliberately grow so much that they then have to find ways to preserve that food. So, you know, canning and batch cooking and freezing and things. So we do that. We do a lot of batch cooking and freezing things like pasta sauces and all that kind of thing. What can we do with a glut of tomatoes? Passata, anyone? But I've decided what I want to do instead is next year I want to start growing in a way that gives me little harvests that are more the kind of size that we need, because there's only 2 of us in the house. So that way, not only can I get just the amount of harvest I want, as I said, so little and often, meaning that when one batch of plants is finished producing, there'll be another one ready to start producing. So I'm hoping it'll also mean we'll extend that harvest time for some of our crops as well. You don't want to do it though for any crops like, you know, things like onions and garlic, things that need to be sown and grown in a specific period of time, or there's no need to do it for things that store very well and store easily. Okay, so that's my plan for next year. Now, it does mean a bit of a change to how I do things, and that's what I'm going to take you through today. It involves quite a bit of thought and planning at this end so that we're ready for next year. But I think once we've got that going, we're going to find that this is actually going to work brilliant, and I'm quite excited to show you. Now, I've broken this down into 3 steps. I've applied 3 steps to this and I'm going to take you through them. And I've got a spreadsheet I've made that I keep all this info on. Now, you can get various pieces of computer software and websites and apps and all that kind of thing to do it. And I did try one. I think it was the Grow Veg Garden Planner I tried. But I can see there are going to be so many good things in that and benefits that a lot of people will like. But for me personally, I found it was just a bit cluttered and difficult for me. So I went back to my good old spreadsheet and I'm going to do it that way. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take you through each of the steps, and I'm going to show you me doing this on the computer so you can see how I fill things in and let you think about how you'll use this for your garden as well. So I said it was 3 steps. Step 1 is quite simply to make a list. Now, what I want you to make a list of though is think about all of the things you want to grow next year, okay? I want you to sit and just write them all down, a big long list. Preferably write the type of plant and the variety. And I want you to whittle it down to the important things you definitely want to grow and decide what is getting cut and what is getting kept. Okay, you will thank me for this, guys. It's a sensible thing, okay? So the next thing we're going to do then, step 2, is we are going to gather information on all of the things we are going to grow, okay? So you've got your list, and I want you to go through your list and start making details, and this is what you want to record. Check your seed packets. They usually have this info on there. But if they don't, you can go online and have a little search. And that's why I told you to make sure you think about the variety as well, because it'll make it much easier when you're searching. So if you can't find it on your seed packets, then online you should be able to find this info. And have a look, and you want to record when should you be sowing the seeds. Okay, so I'm going to take Fandango beans as an example. This is something we grew the year before last. I only planted 6 plants in total for the whole season, so we very quickly ran out of beans. So we're going to grow them this year. But this is what you need to record. So using Fandango as our example, we look up Fandango green beans, and we can see that they should be sown generally in April if you're sowing them indoors, and in May if you're sowing them outdoors. Okay, so that's a really good thing to note. And also have a look at how long the harvest period is for those beans. How long do you think they will be producing? And that again is going to be important. So looking at this then, I know that I can sow these indoors, which for me means in my greenhouse, in April. And I should be able to sow them or transplant them outdoors in May, according to this info. Now, I know that my garden usually gets its last frost roughly mid to late May. So I'm probably not going to put any of those out until the end of May, okay? So that's my garden. These are things I'm thinking about. So I've got, when can I sow these seeds? Can I sow them outdoors straight away? So you may see that called direct sowing. And if not, can I sow them indoors and when? And when will they give me harvest? So when will I roughly stop getting a harvest for those? Those are your 3 things that you're going to take a note of. And then we're going to put all of this onto my spreadsheet. So here we go. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to take the list of what I'm going to grow and I'm going to enter them under the crop. So, for instance, let's start with my beans. And my variety is Fandango. Now, succession. I'm not going to put succession in just this second, but it's going to make sense once I tell you the next bit. You'll see what I've done is I've added here all the months of the year, because I'm going to actually plan out month by month instead of my entire year in one go. And that's going to let me be quite clever, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, when do I sow things and where? So in the greenhouse, in the beds, etc. And then I'm going to say, when will those harvest until? And what I'm going to do is add that in month to month. Now, the way we're doing things, succession sowing, means we might actually be planting 2, 3, 4 batches of each plant, because we're going to say one of those plants is harvesting, the other one is just about to start producing. So we're going to sow things probably maybe 4 weeks apart, so that we've got plants at different stages of maturity. Basically, when one plant is finished and ready to go, we've got another plant coming in to replace it. So that's what the succession sowing is, and that's why I'm going to do things month to month. So I'm going to mark down here that I know I can sow my Fandango beans in the greenhouse in April, and I'm going to mark this on this spreadsheet here. A handy way to do this works very well for me. As you guys know, I'm dyslexic, so if there's too much text, it'll be easy for me to get confused. So I'm going to do it using colours instead. So I'm going to make a little key for myself and use these colours. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these different colours to represent the different things I need to do. So if I'm sowing indoors, I'm going to mark this here in this pink. That lets me know that that's something I'm going to start off sowing it in the greenhouse. Now transplant, I'm going to mark as brown. That is when I'm sowing something, say, in the greenhouse, but I'm then going to take it out of wherever it is and pot it on or plant it somewhere else. Prime example is that we bring on little baby plants like our tomato plants, and we will transfer them at some point to their final position, their final pots. That I'll mark as when I transplant. I'm going to mark what grows in the greenhouse, so that'll be things that grow in there all the time, like my peppers. And I'm going to mark what I'll actually sow and grow outdoors. So that could be, for instance, the group of beans that I will sow in May directly into the raised beds. And we'll talk about that with the succession. I'm also going to mark on here when I expect things to be harvestable. And that will let me decide when I'll do all my different groups of sowings. So I'm going to do that now for you. So I'm going to start sowing my beans indoors in April, so I'm going to make it pink. So what I'll do is I'll copy that cell, and I'm going to say I'm going to sow them mid-April. So you can see what I've done here. I've given all the months 4 cells that we can use, so roughly a 4-week month. I'm not making it super exact. It's a rough guide for me. I'm thinking in terms of early, middle and end of the month. So I'm going to put the pink in the middle to say that that's when I'm going to sow them indoors. So there we go. So middle to end of April. Then they'll carry on growing in the greenhouse until it's time to put them outside. So growing in the greenhouse is green, or aqua rather. So I'm going to say I'm going to keep them in there throughout May, just because I know beans can be tender to frost, and I know I might get a frost at the end of May, so I'll keep them in for that one. But then in June, I'll transplant them out, and they will then grow outdoors in my raised bed. So I'm going to put in there that they're going to grow outdoors in the bed. So I'm expecting roughly throughout June until September, I should get harvest. So I'm going to mark that in now, June to September, yellow for harvest. So that is my very first thing in, and it's my first succession of beans. So I'm going to mark that as 1. Okay. Now, what I also need to know is where I'm going to put things, because I've got 3 raised beds. So I want to be thinking about what I'm putting in each bed. So I'm going to add a wee column here. And I'm going to mark it as where. And I'm going to mark its final position. So I'm going to say bed, and I think I'm going to put them in bed 1. Okay, so that's succession. So it's the first sowing, and it's basically going to live in raised bed number 1. So what I'm going to do next is the second sowing of Fandango. So I'm going to copy that, or you could just type it in, whatever's easier for you. And this is going to be sowing number 2. It's still going to live in bed 1, but I'm going to sow it 4 weeks after the first lot. So not in the middle of April, instead in the middle of May. So let's see, I'm still going to sow indoors because, as I mentioned, I might still get a frost then. So I'm going to keep it in the greenhouse, and I'm going to keep it in the greenhouse for maybe 4 weeks because I'm going to let it get properly established before I put it out. But then I'll put it outside and let it grow on outside. So I reckon it'll probably take a couple of weeks once it's outside to establish, and then, so I'm going to give it, now again, this is me thinking roughly about harvest times. So I reckon it's probably going to take maybe 6 weeks or so for a plant to come into its full maturity to give me those beans. So I will take it up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I will say I should be getting harvest then. Okay, so this is roughly how we're going to do it. So same again, this time it's going to be number 3, and I will do exactly the same thing, but this time I'm going to be into June when I put my first sowings in, so I can actually sow them outside straight away. So I'm going to take the blue for outside, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, mid-June this time, and it's going to grow outside for possibly about 6 or 7 weeks before we get a harvest. Okay, now again, this is rough. As you grow things over the seasons and you're recording it in your gardening journal, you'll be able to tell much more exactly how long a plant will harvest for and at what times. This is me just getting an idea for this year for me, and I'm just wanting to show you roughly how you use this spreadsheet. So that's us for the Fandango beans. I'm going to carry on now and add the rest of these in. Okay, so there we go. That is number 1. Make your list and get details. Number 2, transfer that to the spreadsheet and make sure you've got all of those details in there. When to sow, where to sow, how long they'll take to grow, when you'll get a harvest, all that type of thing. Number 3 is where things get very complicated. So this is where it's going to be so handy to have this spreadsheet to keep you on track. You can see that I've got my blocked out area with each month, and I've got all my colours. But what I want to do now is I want to give myself a month-to-month visual representation of my raised beds and my greenhouse so that I can see what I need to do every single month. And what I've done is I've put a January, February, March onwards onto my spreadsheet here, and I've literally just drawn the greenhouse and the beds. So you can see here, in January then, I don't really have much in the beds, but in January I know that I'm going to sow my peppers and my aubergines, and they're going to be sown in the greenhouse in my Vitapod. So I've marked them onto the spreadsheet. Bed 2 has got my onions and garlic in it. I've got them in there now, and they will still be in there come January, so I've made sure to mark it in. And as we go through, I just go to each month, so that's February, and using the list I've made with the details, I transfer to this little diagram what's going to go where. So again, February, we've got the aubergine and peppers that we already mentioned, but I'm adding the tomatoes because in February, I'm going to sow my tomato seeds. I did it in January this year and I realised that was far too early, so I'm going to take a little month away and put them in February this time. That still gives me a nice early sowing, but it gives me that little month, but I don't need them to be quite so early. So again, we just keep going. And what we do, if I go on a few, let's say if I go on to April, you'll see, now you can really see what's happening. I'm now putting my tomatoes, my aubergines, peppers, etc. in the places that they will be finally, because April's roughly when I put them in their final pots. And that lets me see the greenhouse and I can think about how busy it is in there. And it gets helpful when we start planting into the beds. So you can see here in May, I said that's when I was going to transplant the beans out to the beds. So you can see here I've marked in 2 rows of beans in bed number 3. I had originally thought bed number 1, but I'm actually rethinking, and you'll see why when I talk about this in a sec. I've also got in there the first lot of carrots. Now, there's not a lot of other stuff going on, except the courgettes. Now, courgettes are one of those crops that I start off in the greenhouse, but they grow very, very quickly. So I'm not going to start them too early, but I also don't want to put them out too early. So that's why they're not appearing here until May. It may possibly be June. It's just going to depend on the last frosts, but it's in there, so I now know how much space I've got. Because when I've got 2 courgette plants in here, I don't have space for a lot of other crops. I know I can get maybe a wee row of lettuce between them, but I now know that bed is full, and I now have to think, where am I putting everything else? That's why I made you think about what you've got in your garden space-wise and have a think about where you're going to put them in your garden. And this is going to be really good because once you've harvested and things have passed, you'll be able to see where there are going to be gaps. So you'll know when you're planting the next lot of things, there's a gap that they can go in. For example, I've got more beans coming into bed 3 in June. You can see I've got 1 and 2, but in July, I expect that the first sowing of beans is probably going to be past. So I'll be putting beans 3 in their space when that happens. And if I take it all the way to September, you can see that bed 2 is empty, but it's had onions and garlic in there the whole time. That's because I'm expecting to have harvested everything from that bed in August. So that means I've now got an empty bed that I can put my next lot of veggies in. So I can look at my list and say, what did I say I was going to sow in September? And I can put it in that bed. That is why you make yourself this month-to-month plan. It helps you to work out where there are going to be gaps and when, so that you can add your crops in at the right times and the right place, and you don't end up with too much or with huge big empty beds that you wish you had sown something in. So I hope that's helpful. I said I was going to give you guys a copy of this spreadsheet. So what I've done is I've put a Google Drive link in the description for this video, and you can save yourself a copy of that sheet. Now, make sure you save a copy to your computer, because if you just use it from the link and edit there, everyone has access to that. Someone could make the same mistake as you and they could start filling that sheet in, and it will actually copy over the work you've done. So make sure you make a copy. So I hope that was helpful, but you know that I am going to be keeping you guys up to date every step of the way on this next year, and you'll be able to follow me with what I'm thinking about growing, where it's going to go, did it work, did it not work, and we'll have even more info to add to our spreadsheet for next year. There's your first piece of homework for what you can be doing over winter then. Get planning, and I'll see you guys next week. See you everyone.